Have you ever felt stuck in an endless cycle of frustration, as if your life were at a standstill and you couldn't figure out why? The truth is that, more often than not, it's not the big decisions that destroy us, but the small choices we make every day. Ignoring a commitment here, procrastinating there, compromising integrity on something seemingly insignificant, and before we realize it, we drift away from God's divine purpose for our lives. But there's a way out of this cycle. The Bible is full of stories of spiritual transformation, showing that obedience to God opens doors to blessings and inner peace. In this text, we will explore how our daily choices can either bring us closer to or take us further away from God's will, and how we can restore our commitment to Him. Get ready, because some truths might be uncomfortable, but in the end, they will bring true freedom. Life doesn't change suddenly, but rather through the accumulation of small daily choices. Hitting the snooze button, postponing a commitment, or ignoring something we know is important may seem harmless at the moment. But over time, these habits form a pattern. Suddenly, we find ourselves stuck in a life with no progress, wondering where we went wrong. What seems insignificant today might be the very thing keeping us from living out God's purpose tomorrow. Daily choices define our future just as much as major decisions. An athlete doesn't become a champion from a single training session, but through continuous discipline. In the same way, our Christian life is built on small commitments, a moment of prayer, an act of faith, a decision to obey. God gives us free will, and each choice we make either strengthens or weakens our spiritual walk. Small actions shape who we become, for better or for worse. Many times, we choose to obey only what is convenient, believing that small transgressions don't really matter. But is that true obedience? When God gives us a command, He expects full surrender, not partial compliance. Justifying small acts of disobedience paves the way for a divided heart. Selective obedience may seem harmless, but in the end, it distances us from the blessings God has prepared for us. Imagine a driver who follows all the traffic laws, except one: he doesn't stop at red lights. He might argue that he obeys every other rule, but that one infraction can cause a major disaster. The same is true in our Christian life. Integrity requires complete commitment. Choosing which principles to follow is not obedience, it's disguised rebellion. God calls us to a life of total surrender, because only then can we experience His peace and purpose fully. The story of Saul teaches us that partial obedience is, in reality, complete disobedience. God commanded him to destroy everything after the battle against the Amalekites, but Saul decided to spare what he deemed valuable, justifying it by saying he would offer sacrifices to God. His intentions seemed good, but his choice revealed a heart that didn't fully trust in God's will. The result? He lost God's favor, and his reign crumbled. How often do we repeat Saul's mistake? We try to negotiate with God, obeying only what suits us and ignoring the rest. But true faith is not about convenience, it's about commitment. Disobedience always has consequences, even when we believe our intentions are good. Saul's story warns us following God halfway can completely separate us from Him. God does not give us commandments to limit us, but to protect and bless us. Deuteronomy 5:33 says that when we follow His ways, we will live well and prolong our days. Just as a father teaches his child not to play in the street to prevent accidents, God instructs us so that we may live in peace and fulfillment. Obedience is not a burden, it is the path to experiencing the best He has for us. Many people see biblical principles as strict rules, but the truth is, they are keys to true freedom. When we choose to obey God, we discover that He leads us to a life of joy and purpose. The prosperity the Bible speaks of is not just material, but also spiritual and emotional. Inner peace and the certainty of being in the center of God's will are blessings that only obedience can bring. Spiritual downfall rarely happens all at once. Small compromises, seemingly harmless decisions, and minor concessions can gradually pull us away from God. King Solomon is a classic example of this. At first, he was a wise and upright man, But over time, he began making alliances with pagan nations, adopting customs that dishonored God. He didn't fall in one day. It was a slow process, the result of small, misguided choices. The same happens to us. A little lie here, a bit of negligence there, a broken commitment, and before we know it, we're far from the right path. Sin rarely presents itself in an obvious, terrifying way. It disguises itself as something acceptable, even convenient. That's why we must be vigilant about our daily decisions. Small compromises with wrongdoing lead to major consequences in the future. But thankfully, the opposite is also true. Small choices of faithfulness strengthen our walk with God. The world teaches us that freedom means doing whatever we want, without restrictions. But does that truly set us free? The Bible shows us that real freedom does not come from following our own desires, but from submitting to God's will. Jesus said in John 8:32, "You will know the truth, and the truth will set you free." When we choose to obey God, we are freed from the bondage of sin and discover a greater purpose for our lives. Many times, we confuse freedom with total independence, but looking around, we can see that doesn't work. Those who live without boundaries end up trapped in addictions, frustrations, and regrets. God does not give us commandments to imprison us, but to protect us and guide us toward a fulfilling life. The more we surrender to Him, the freer we become because we find inner peace, clear direction, and an eternal purpose. No matter how far we've strayed, God never closes the door to those who want to return. The parable of the prodigal son is a powerful reminder of this. The young man wasted everything, made terrible choices, and hit rock bottom. But the moment he decided to return, he found a loving father with open arms. God does not reject us. When we fail, He waits for us with grace and mercy. Often, the weight of regret makes us believe that there's no way back, but that's a lie. God is not just interested in our past, He cares about our hearts right now. True repentance leads to spiritual transformation and restores our commitment to Him. If Saul lost God's favor because of his persistent disobedience, David, despite his grave mistakes, was restored because he acknowledged his sins and wholeheartedly sought God. The key is not to never fail, but to always return. The Christian life is not defined by a single moment of decision, but by a series of small daily choices. Every day, we are faced with opportunities to obey or ignore God's will. Choosing to pray even when we are tired, maintaining integrity even when no one is watching, and acting with love even when we don't feel like it. These are the decisions that shape our character and keep us on the right path. We don't need to wait for major challenges to demonstrate our faith. Transformation happens in the details and how we treat people, the words we choose to say, and the priorities we set. The more we practice obedience in small things, the easier it becomes to trust God in the big ones. True peace and joy do not come from the absence of difficulties, but from the certainty that we are aligned with God's purpose. Now that you understand how small choices can either transform or destroy your life, the question remains, what decisions have you been making lately? Are there areas where you've practiced selective obedience, or seemingly harmless habits that, little by little, are pulling you away from God's purpose? The good news is, it's never too late to change. Each new day is an opportunity to realign your heart and your life with God's will. If this message resonated with you, don't just leave these truths in theory. Start applying them today. Choose daily obedience, build small commitments with God, and watch blessings flow into your life. And to continue growing spiritually, subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications, and follow more content that will help you on this journey. Your transformation starts today.